Welcome back, friends. Last week's tournament results are done and in the books, and I got all the data here for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you like the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you're related, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest videos. If you're looking for any other ways to help support the channel, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link is in the description below. Any help is greatly appreciated. All right, guys, let's get started. And we have the player numbers for the previous week here. So last week we had 1,073 players, and for the data slate we're sitting at 6,621. There was just over 5,300 games played last week, and for the data slate we're sitting at just over 34,500. And there's 23 tournaments, bringing the data slate total up to 130. All right, so first up is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. Just a quick reminder that Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%, so anything in that range will be in green, anything 5% above or below will be in orange, and anything above that or below that will be in red. Coming in number 1 last week was Sisters of Battle with 60.9% win rate. Number 2 is Genestealer Cults at 56.4. Then we had Death Guard at 56.2. Drukhari at 54.3, and Thousand Suns at 53.5. And then down at the bottom we had Grey Knights at 33.9, Space Marines at 38.5, Imperial Agents at 40, Emperor's Children at 40.4, and then Tau at 42.8. So these arrows show the changes for each army versus the previous week, so you can just get an idea of how they're moving up and down the charts. So it was a big week for Sisters. So Sisters Battle came in first this week with 60.9% win rate. It was a really big week for them, coming in number 1. It's been a long time since they've been on the top spot there. And to overthrow Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights and Death Guard is a pretty good feat. Genestealer Cults continues their strong run in the current meta with a 56.4% win rate. And then Death Guard, not surprising to see them there, also at 56.2. They're doing good as always. Drukhari, another one that's been doing pretty good lately in this current meta, and they're up at 54.3% this week as well. So Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights dropped down a little bit versus last week. They're both at just under 53%. There's nothing to worry about for them there. Those are still very good results, just not dominating as they were the previous week. AdMech had a pretty good week. They've found themselves up in the middle of the board there last couple weeks, which is nice to see, 51%. Some of the ones at the bottom there, Orcs just over the 45%. They've been down there. World Eaters dropped down quite a bit. They're at 45% this week. And then the armies that have been struggling sort of continue. And it's kind of surprising to see Grey Knights and Space Marines both down there low. We haven't seen Space Marines down in the red in a long time. They've been maintaining decent win rates week over week, but it was a bad week for them this week. It is interesting that 2 of the armies that are getting codexes coming up, Black Templars and Grey Knights, are both near the bottom. Now, Black Templars are a little bit higher up than Grey Knights this week, but both those armies are definitely in need of a codex, and it's good timing for both of them. Overall, the chart looks okay, I would say. We have a few armies that are just underneath that 45% win rate, but I mean, if your goal is to just be within that green region, you don't want to be just at 45. That's still very poor, and you don't want those armies up at 56 and 60%. You would like them sort of cut down a little bit. It's a pretty wild time right now with everything that's going on and all the codexes dropping and all the changes happening with knights and everything. So, it is what it is, and it's probably not going to get much better until they make some changes coming up in the next data slate. All right, moving on to the army representation. So this is the percentage of players playing each army. So if everyone played every army equally, they would be at about 3.6, 3.7%. Coming in at number 1 is Death Guard at 8.9%. Then we have Chaos Knights at 7.2, Imperial Knights at 6.2, Space Marines at 5.4, and then we have Tyranids and Aeldari both at 5.1. And down in last place there, we have Agents at 0.1, AdMech at 0.8, Black Templars and Grey Knights both at 1.1, and Death Watch at 1.2. So this is going to be a pretty quick one. Death Guard maintaining about 9% representation week over week, which is just absolutely crazy, but not surprised based on how well they're doing. Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights 1 and 2, again, not surprising based on the overall results of this data slate. Then you have all the very popular armies underneath there: Space Marines, Tyranids, Aeldari, Necrons, Thousand Suns, Blood Angels, World Eaters. They're always going to be higher up in their representation no matter what their sort of results are, because they're very popular armies. Then you have the armies at the bottom who, for the most part, have been struggling: Grey Knights, Black Templars, Emperor's Children. Drukhari has been doing good, but their model range is just so old and they're in desperate need of a refresh, and I think once they get that refresh, you'll see a lot of people come back to them. Genestealer Cults, they're a very difficult army to play, they're expensive to buy, they're hard to paint, so they're never going to be super popular army, but they're getting good results as well. And like I said, Black Templars and Grey Knights both at 1.1%. They're both due to get a codex, I think, next weekend. So we should, in a couple weeks, start to see some momentum build. I would expect to see Grey Knights get a few more players than Black Templars, but overall, because I just think they're a little bit more of a popular army. But we should hopefully see those numbers go up. Overall, this chart looks like it does every week, and there's not really much to say, and it's not really going to change until we get a new data slate, unfortunately. We might have some armies swap up and down here and there, week over week. Chaos Knights went up to number 2 this week after being 4 or 5. So that's interesting. A lot of people are jumping to Knights, but overall, it's going to look roughly the same. All right, next up is the combined stats for the previous week. So this is Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So just a quick reminder that XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went undefeated or only lost one game in a tournament, so 5-0 or 4-1. It's not a perfect stat, but it's just a good way to measure how an army is doing in comparison to their win rate. The higher an XOX1 percentage, the more chance you see an army at the top table or getting further ahead in the tournament and a better chance to win, versus an army with low XOX1 percentage, they're going to be more at the mid tables or the bottom tables with not really much chance to win any tournaments. So Sisters had a pretty crazy week this week. Not surprising based on their almost 61% win rate, but they had over 45% XOX1, so almost half their players only lost one game or didn't lose any games. Now, they had fairly low rep at 2.2, so they didn't have a huge player base, but of those players that did show up, over half of them did very well, so they had a very strong week this week. Death Guard, Genius Occults, and surprisingly AdMech, not that far behind, so all of them had over 30% XOX1. The difference is AdMech had only a 51% win rate, whereas Death Guard and Gene Stealers had a 56. So while they both had around the same amount of success, going 4-1 or 5-0 and getting to those top tables, as a whole, Gene Stealer Cults and Death Guard had more success sort of with the rest of the armies. Probably a few more people going 3-1 versus like 2-3, kind of dragging that AdMech score down a bit. So AdMech, it looks like an army that had 30% of the player base do really well, and then the other half probably do just mid or poor and kind of dragging the win percentage down a little bit. They also have a very low representation, so it doesn't take too much to swing the XOX1 in really high in their favor when it comes to AdMech as well. So down at the bottom, we have Grey Knights, Agents, Space Marines. They're all kind of lumped in pretty close together there. Both Grey Knights had a 0% XOX1, and Space Marines, even though they had 5.4% representation, so well above average, they only had 1.7%. So only a couple people did really well with Space Marines. For the most part, they did pretty poorly. It was a rough week to be a Space Marines player. And same as Grey Knights, they had 0% XOX1. So while they didn't have a ton of the meta, only 1.1%, probably only like 10 or 12 players, it was a tough time and pretty much just got stomped every which way. So Space Wolves is the latest army to get a codex. They're at just over 50% win rate. Their XOX1 is almost 22%. They have a 3% representation this week. So they're starting to build a little momentum after the codex comes out. Players are coming back. XOX1 is really good, almost 22%. That's really high considering the average is around 15 or 16%. So they're getting some good results, and it's not an overpowered sort of dominating the meta codex, but kind of like the World Eaters, where it kind of falls right into the middle there, and they're getting good results without being too dominating. So, that's what you like to see, but it kind of sucks when there's other armies around you who are getting those super powerful codexes and you don't really stand a chance against them. It is what it is. It's better to be sort of in the middle than it is to be overpowered or to be broken, to be fair. And that's what we hope to see with Grey Knights and Templars. One of those codexes that will slot them right in the middle there, and the more armies we can get in the middle, the better the overall state of the game will be. And it might be a little bit boring not to have those ones at the very high in the top and very high at the bottom, but it's better for the game overall. All right, next up is the tournament wins for each army last week. So just taking a look there, Death Guard had 4 and Aeldari had 4, and then Sisters of Battle had 3, Asher Militarum had 3, Gene Stealers and World Leaders had 2, and then we had Drukhari, Death Watch, Dark Angels, Chaos Space Marines, and AdMech all with 1. So it was a good week. Death Watch and Drukhari both got their first tournament wins. So they were 2 of the 4 armies who hadn't got a tournament win yet, so it's nice to see. So Death Guard just keeps piling up the wins. They got 4 more this week. Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights both were held off the leaderboards here for the week, which is kind of surprising based on how many wins they have been getting. But Aeldari picked up the slack and picked up 4 wins there. Next up is the tournament wins for each sub-factions. It just kind of breaks down how each army is getting their tournament wins. So for Sisters, Hallowed Martyrs got 3 of their wins, so they're doing most of the work there for Sisters. Death Guard, it was split between 3 different detachments. So you had Mortarian's Hammer, you had Death Lord's Chosen, and Champions of Contagion. For World Eaters, it was Berzeker Warband. Aeldari was split between Aspect Host, War Host, and Seer Council. And then AdMech, when they got their win, was this Skitarii Hunter cohort, so that's good to see for them. Pick up another win there. And Drukhari got theirs with Reaper's Wager. All right, so next up is the win percentage by armies for the current data slate. So this is the last 7 weeks of data here. So again, a quick reminder, Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. So anything in that range will be in green. Anything 5% above or below will be in orange, and anything above or below that will be in red. So not surprising, even though they had a little bit of a down week, quote unquote, with a 53% win rate, Imperial Knights is still number 1 at 56.6%. Chaos Knights number 2 at 54.3%. Death Guard number 3 at 54.2%. Gene Stealer Cults number 4 at 53.9%. And then we have Thousand Sons at number 5 at 52.4. Down to bottom, we have Agents at 28.3, Orcs at 43.1, and we have Space Marines at 43.7, Grey Knights at 43.7, and then we have Death Watch and Dark Angels both at 44.8%. So looking at the top of the chart there, Imperial Knights is the only army above 55% win rate, but we do have Chaos Knights and Death Guard dangerously close to bumping over. One good week there will push them both over because they're just over 54%, so they're almost there. So that is quite a few armies above the threshold, and even being close to that threshold is still probably a little bit too good. Genestealer Cults and Thousand Suns are both in really good spots as well. They're close to getting up to that 55%, but they're still couple, percent or two below, so they're sitting okay. Some of the armies that I didn't really expect to see there: Sisters of Battle, almost at 52%, really good to see. Drukhari sitting right around where they should be at about 50.6, so that's pretty perfect, same as Leagues of Votann. Then you have down at the bottom the armies who are suffering a little bit there. You got Orcs at 43, Space Marines at 43, and Grey Knights at 43, and then Dark Angels and Deathwatch both at 44.8. So Dark Angels and Deathwatch are both like one game away, basically, from popping into that 45% and getting into the green. But it's really not much of an accomplishment considering you're at the bottom of the acceptable win rate. So while it is good to be up there, you don't want to be that far down. You still are in need of a lot of love to sort of bring you back up closer to where you should be, into the middle. It is good to see that both Black Templars, who are just over that threshold, and Grey Knights, who are just under the threshold, are getting new codexes, like I mentioned before, so that should help bump them up into the middle there, assuming they're both good codexes, or at least playable codexes, which, based on all the releases that we've seen, has been the case. There really hasn't been too many duds lately, so that should hopefully bring up a couple of those armies at the bottom, and then we just got to pray for some good Dataslate changes where we can help out Space Marines and Orcs and bring down Imperial Knights, and Death Guard, basically. Overall, this is definitely one of the more imbalanced charts we've seen for the data slates. Generally speaking, you don't have any armies over 55%, maybe just one, and we're sitting at potentially getting 3 or 4 over. And then down at the bottom, we've got 4 or 5 armies below 45% win rate. So it is pretty imbalanced, and it's definitely too many changes all happening at once and kind of threw everything off for this data slate. So hopefully some corrections can be made. All right, next up is the army representation for the current data slate. So again, this is the percentage of players playing each army. So if everyone played every army equally, it'd be about 3.6, 3.7%. So this is the last 7 weeks of data here. So at number 1, we have Death Guard at 8.8%, Imperial Knights number 2 at 6.3, Tyranids at number 4 at 5.6, then Space Marines with 5.2, and then Necrons with 5. And then down at the bottom, we have Imperial Agents at 0.2, Black Templars at 0.9, Deathwatch at 1, AdMech at 1.4. Then we've got Grey Knights and Genestealer Cults both at 1.7. So at the top there, Death Guard maintains their massive lead on number 2 there. They're clearly the favorite army for the whole data slate. And I mean, Knights would normally be in the number 1 spot with about 6.3. That's normally where the top one lands, maybe a little bit higher, but they're number 2, and they're number 2 by a long shot. So we have 2 armies making up over 15% of the meta, which is really not what you want to see. So Dark Angels, they're still maintaining pretty good representation, 3.9%. They're over the meta average, just barely, but that's perfectly fine. That's exactly where you want to be. They're not getting great results, but popular army, and hopefully a few more changes can be made and little tweaks there, and can really push them up into the middle. And we might even see some more Dark Angels players comes back. So Emperor's Shogun, they're kind of living around that 2.5, 2.6%, same as Leagues of Votann. They're just the limited army, limited range, new release. Everyone's kind of going back to their old armies. So they're just kind of going to live down there, I think, probably for a little bit until they get a second wave, which will be years down the road based off of World Eaters not really getting anything yet. So not really holding my breath on seeing a Berserker back up to the top of the charts like they were, but they're in an okay spot given what their army is right now. And then we have armies like Sisters of Battle and Space Wolves who are starting to get some better results week over week, and their numbers are slowly climbing up. But they're kind of live down there, I think, for the rest of this data slate, because we have so many weeks of data with them not getting many players, so it's going to hard to overcome the first 4 or 5 weeks there. And then down at the bottom, Grey Knights and Black Templars should see a bump in the next coming weeks. I expect Grey Knights to be bumped up a little bit more than Black Templars, as they're just, I think, a little bit more popular overall. Should both go up quite a bit, hopefully, with the new codexes coming out. I mean, this is the chart with the least amount of green on it overall. Lots of red on both sides, and it's not surprising. There is, it always seems to look this way, where there's 10 armies at the top who are clearly the most popular. You have the most overpowered armies. Then you have the fan favorites who always have lots of players. And then you have the armies at the bottom who just either are not doing good and people are abandoning them, or they're just those sort of niche armies that not everybody plays. So overall, I don't expect a representation chart to not look like this. It might not be as skewed as it is with the top being so heavy, which would be a little bit nicer if that was dragged down a bit, but is what we've come to expect. Okay, next up is the combined stats for the Dataslate. So we have Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So just another quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went 5-0 or 4-1 at a tournament. It's not a perfect stat, but it's just a good way to look at an army's power compared to the win percentage. The higher XOX1, the more likely you are to see them at the top tables and better chance to win a tournament, versus the ones who have a lower XOX1, they're kind of sitting at mid or bottom boards there, not really getting to those top tables. So coming in number 1, we have Imperial Knights, and then number 2 is Death Guard, Thousand Sons at number 3, Sisters of Battle number 4, and Chaos Knights at number 5. Then down at the bottom, we have Agents, Black Templars, Grey Knights, Orcs, and Admech. So Sisters jumped into the top 4 there. They overtook Chaos Knights. That is quite the feat considering they have half the representation as Chaos Knights and a lower win percentage. So they're making up a lot of the ground with XOX1, which is just players doing very well at a tournament. So Sisters actually has the highest XOX1 percentage of any army right now across the entire data slate, which is a little bit surprising to see considering how well Imperial Knights has been doing and Death Guard. But almost 25% of Sisters Battle players only lost 1 game or haven't lost any games at tournaments. So that's really good. They're getting some really good results. Now it is very focused within one detachment, Liberators, that's doing sort of most of the work for them. After all the suffering they've been through, it's good to see that there is some play there and they can find some wins. They're maybe not getting as many tournament wins as you'd like to see, but they're definitely doing a lot better than they have been. Grey Knights and Black Templars are getting a new codex soon. I've already mentioned a couple times. They're near the bottom, second and last and third last, so hopefully that should bump them up a bit because they are well under 10% XOX1, and considering the average is 15%, they're way far down there and just struggling a lot right now. Just kind of getting left behind with all the new codexes that came out and sort of a lack of anti-tank, which is kind of a big deal right now with all the Knights and Death Guard running around. So hopefully the new codex comes out and give them a little bit more options and they can get some better results coming up. Overall, I think the chart's looking okay. There's really not too many standouts other than the ones I mentioned. There's a lot of armies right in the middle there, which is kind of what you want to see. Anywhere from Tau up to like Blood Angels is in a pretty good spot where you're sitting at within the meta average on most things by 1 or 2%. And then once you get above or below that, it starts dropping down a little bit for those armies who need a little tweak to sort of boost them up a little bit or need a little tweak to drop them down a lot. But overall, it could be better, but it's not terrible based off of everything else we've seen. Next up, we have the Army Tournament wins, and this is for the current data slate for the last 7 weeks. And it's broken down week over week, so each week is a different color, so you can get an idea of when each army is getting their tournament wins. So coming in number 1, Death Guard with 24. Then we have Imperial Knights with 13. We have Aeldari, Chaos Knights, and World Eaters with 10. And then we have Genestealer Cults and Sisters with 5. That rounds out the top like 5 or 6 there. So after a really good week for Death Guard, getting 4 wins, and Knights getting 0, Death Guard almost doubles Imperial Knights with 24 to 13 wins. So there's definitely going to be some major changes happening to Death Guard in the next data slate, because there's no way that the army with the most tournament wins should be double the second place army, let alone all the other armies. So we can all hope and pray that they get a little bit of a nerf to bring it down, and that's a lot of wins being soaked up by even those top 2 armies there. So if we could spread those out a little bit better, we'd be looking in a lot better of a place. Like I mentioned before, both Deathwatch and Drukhari both picked up tournament wins this week, so that leaves Agents and Space Wolves with the only armies without any tournament wins for the edition. I have hopes that Space Wolves might be able to pull it out. Agents, that's a tough one. They're going to have to get lucky, maybe a smaller tournament or something like that, and pull it a win. But it's been a while since we've seen Agents get a tournament win. But I have faith with the new codex and people finding their footing that Space Wolves will be able to pull one out. For the faction focus this week, we're doing 2 sides of the coin. We have the bloodthirsty Imperial Army of the Blood Angels first. So looking at their week-over-week stats, you can see their win rate is actually pretty good. They have one little dip down to 45%, but for the most part, they've been anywhere from 47 to 54%, which is right where you want to be, kind of averaging at around 50. And the representation has been anywhere from 4 to 5% over the last 5 weeks there. Look at their army stats versus the meta average. Everything is pretty much bang on the average. Their win percentage is 0.4% higher. Their representation is a little bit higher at 4.9 versus 3.6. That's the one standout. Their XOX1 is only 2% higher, and their tournament wins is 0.2% higher. So Blood Angels is in a pretty good spot. You look, their meta health rating is 110 versus 100, so they're just 10% above the meta average across the board, roughly, and that's in a really good place to be. That's if everyone was within that range, it would be perfect. That's exactly where I want everyone to be. Then you're looking at the sub-faction numbers there. So Liberators Assault Group has over 78% of the player base, and then the other basically rest of the players fall into Angelic Inheritors at 19%. And then you look at the win rates. Liberators Assault Group is a 48.8% win rate. And then you have Angelic Inheritors with 52%. So Angelic Inheritors is actually getting better results overall, but it's from a much smaller player base. So if that player base increase, you might see that drop down a little bit. But the players who are playing that right now seem to know what they're doing and picking up a pretty good win percentage there. And just quick look at their tournament wins on the bottom there. Sub-faction tournament wins. Liberators Assault Group has 3 and Angelic Inheritors has 2. So despite the much smaller number of players for Inheritors, they still managed to pull out 2 tournament wins. Overall, I think Blood Angels is in a really good spot. Always seem to be one of those armies that just does good. Very rarely do you see them at the bottom. All their stats are right around the meta average. They're right where you want to be. And if every army could be more like the Blood Angels right now, stats-wise, it would be in a much healthier spot. And on the other side of the coin, we have World Eaters, the Traitor Legion's Bloodthirsty Space Marine army. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to do Blood Angels and World Eaters with kind of both sides of the coin there, and armies that kind of play similarly, a little bit different, but they're very in-your-face, melee-oriented armies, so just kind of curious to see how they're doing. Looking at their previous 8-week results, much like Blood Angels, they're anywhere from 47 to, say, 50%, so not quite getting as good results on the win percentage as Blood Angels, but they're very close to where you want to be right around the average. Their representation is anywhere from 4 to 5.5, 5.7%, so they're a little bit higher representation, but just slightly. And looking at their stats versus the meta average, so the win percentage is 0.5% below the average, where Blood Angels is 0.5% over. Their representation is 5 versus 3.6, so it's slightly higher than Blood Angels. Their XOX1 is slightly lower, 15.2 versus 16.6. Still very respectable, right where you want to be. And this is where the big separator comes in with the tournament wins. They have 10 tournament wins versus the meta average of 4.8. So that gives them a meta health rating of 107. And now, if it wasn't for those tournament wins, they would probably be down around 103, 104. Overall, they're still within that sort of 10% of the average. So, they're in a good spot. Looking at their sub-faction data, much like Blood Angels, Berzeker Warband is over 75% of the player base. And then we have Khorne Demonkin at 18.5%. So again, very similar to Blood Angels in their numbers for players. And you look at their win percentages, Berzeker Warband, 48%, very similar to Blood Angels Liberators at 48.8. And then the next army there that's played is the Khorne Demonkin. They have a 45% win rate. So that's kind of where the difference makes up, where they lose a little win percentage. That second tier where all the other players are playing, they're not picking up a little extra bit of wins with that army. So Berzeker Warband is getting the best results and they're getting the most players, so that kind of makes sense. And if you look at their sub-faction tournament wins, Berzeker Warband has 9 and Khorne Demonkin has 1. So it's a lot more skewed in one favor for World Eaters than it is with Blood Angels. Overall, I think World Eaters is in a very good spot. Again, right in that sort of middle range where everyone should be and everyone would want to be. I think going forward, a couple tweaks here and there can kind of give some more options to the army, so everyone doesn't have to play the one detachment, Berzerker. They can kind of branch out and play a couple different options, but they're in a really good spot right now, and let's hope they can maintain this. And that is it for this week, guys. Thanks for watching. I want a big shout out to my Patreon members. We have Meep the Great, John Gurman, William Viz, and Darby Conrad. And for my YouTube channel members, Andrew Stone. Sorry I missed your last time, and I should have given you a call, but I didn't. But you're in there now, and I really appreciate everybody's support. And if you want to join these guys, you can visit my Patreon, patreon.com/warfriends. Link is in the description below. Or you can become a channel member just right through YouTube. I say this every week, but I really appreciate everybody. All the support has been amazing. I love reading your guys' stories. I love reading your comments. I try to respond to as many as I can. It's really fun to interact with everybody, and I really appreciate everyone who's going above and beyond to support me on Patreon and through YouTube. Good luck in the tournaments coming up this weekend, guys, and I will see you next week.